A Duke University professor argues, seriously, that the reason white female academics are posing as minorities is because, wait for it, the privilege of white males. Yep, you heard that correct. What a perfect example of intersectional nonsense in action. I'm Dr. Duke. She would be Katie, but she's not here, so she ain't. And this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. Flying solo today on the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Katie is off again today, and we start with the obvious stain on America. Cis-gendered white men who are apparently forcing white women to pretend they're Hispanic and black. Because these days, even white women are triggered by white men. The story is almost too hard to believe, but it makes a kind of sense if you understand the liberal progressive mind. Story comes from the College Fix. We have a Duke professor that's actually blaming men. You know, we have this spate of stories. I think we've got 6 or 7 now, professors or grad students who got their positions in part by, they're all women, claiming to be Chicana, Latin American, claiming to be black, and now the comeuppance is happening, right? They're outing themselves, or they're being outed by their friends, their fellow graduate students who couldn't get jobs because they're not black or Hispanic, are now outing some of the professors and grad students for getting their positions on the basis of lying about race. There really is, according to the College Fix, there really is nothing the left won't blame on white men. Not even white women passing themselves off as black, Hispanic, or American Indian. The latest Caucasian outed as something she's not is Kelly Keene Sharp of Furman University in South Carolina. And now looking at her, there you go. There's our little Chicana, our little pretend Chicana. An anonymous person from her past, I guarantee you it was a fellow graduate student. An anonymous person from her past at the University of California, Davis, wrote a post that said the professor of African American history never identified that way in grad school, but has started to do so on Twitter. Step back and show the picture again. We're asked to believe the little white girl is actually Hispanic. At least she didn't shoot for African American. But here's the thing that gets me. She's a white girl pretending to be a Chicana who's teaching African American literature. How is that right? Why are you allowing Chicanas to teach African American lit? Are you allowing young black activists to teach Chicana literature? I just don't see it. What are you doing here? I mean, if you're going to do this right. Either you follow your dignity, follow your argument down its logical conclusion that only members of particular BIPOC races should ever be allowed to teach the culture of those things. What gets me about this is that you at Furman University, where's your commitment to hiring an African American to teach African American lit? Why did you and the fact that you had to settle for another minority, or so you thought, tells us what kind of idiots you are. So you almost, when push comes to shove, you almost see them as interchangeable, don't you? Black, Hispanic, Asian, lesbian, gay, they're all interchangeable, right? They're all able to do. You would never hire me to teach African American lit, however credentialed I might be. But you certainly would hire somebody who, even though she's white, is playing herself off as a Chicana. This anonymous person that outed her, I guarantee it was a jealous graduate student. The author got in touch with Sharp's other acquaintances who quizzed her on her ancestry, and she claimed to have a mother from Mexico. They did some genealogical digging and learned her grandmother was born in Los Angeles. Hey, what else does an unemployed graduate student have to do but conduct research? Conduct research on white girls getting jobs in the name of Mexicanity. They did some genealogical digging and learned her grandmother was born in L.A. She never left the United States as far as they could find. Unbelievably, Duke University's cultural anthropologist Christine Folk, I believe that's how it's spelled, it's pronounced F-O-L-C-H, Folk or Fulch, she told the Chronicle of Higher Education, here is the story, that the absence of white men pulling these stunts shows their privilege. The fact that white women are doing this but not men, we don't have a single example of a white man A white male graduate student or professor who's pretending to be racially something he's not. You have to go back to that guy in Colorado, back at 9/11. What was his name? There was a guy at Colorado, the University of Colorado, who was masquerading as an Indian, saying horrible things about how the people who blew up in 9/11 deserved it. Not since that 20 years ago, as far as we know, have we had a white man pretending to be a racial minority. And the argument says, Professor Folk of Duke University, the very reason men don't is because they're privileged. Quote, at the root, I think that what we see is competition for scarce resources on the part of those who are not the hegemonic ideal in academia, which remains white male. Honey, have you been on a college campus lately? The ideal on a college campus is a white dude. The ideal faculty member, the ideal student is a white male. Not for 40 years. Not for the last 40 years has that been true. And so your argument is there are no white men stealing minority positions. That just goes to show that the women who are stealing minority positions do it because of white men. This is the kind of circular stupidity that they call logic on college campuses. And let's not forget, it pays if you're female to steal the identity of minorities. I mean, take Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas. What has she suffered from ripping off an affirmative action job that was supposed to be held for Native Americans at Harvard, right? At the most prestigious institution in the world, Elizabeth Warren stole her position from a Native American. She enriched herself greatly by that association with Harvard. She got tenure. She became incredibly wealthy. Now she's up for a huge, big cabinet position in the potential Joe Biden administration. And hint, it will not be the Bureau of Indian Affairs that she gets appointed to. Something much bigger than that. And so the absolute gall, you could even call the story, the first and the second story today, and even the third, the consequences of intersectionality. Remember what I defined intersectionality as, because this is a perfect example. Whenever liberals do something stupid or wrong, whenever progressives fight amongst themselves, who's more victimized, the African-American male or the gay female? Who's higher on the victim chart of achievement? Because that's everything. It's not your credentials. It's not your PhD. It's not how many books you publish. It's how much victimhood can you claim that makes you important to universities. So whenever you have liberals, progressives saying stupid things or fighting amongst themselves, intersectionality was a worldview that came along that said, okay, stop fighting with yourself. Stop apologizing for what you've done wrong. Blame it on whitey. Stop fighting who has more victimhood, the white lesbian or the black straight man. Quit arguing those things among our constituents and just blame both of them on the white man. And here you have a classic example where Christine Folk says the reason women are stealing positions is because men have privileged status on campuses. Again, if you know anything about college campuses, you're going to laugh yourself silly trying to process that one. Speaking of intersectionality and the insanity of universities, how about this next story? A Virginia Tech professor says the phrase American people, that phrase is racist. Every time you say the American people, you are engaging in racist hate speech. But then again, he said, beer is also racist. Professor of sociology, of course, what else would it be, at Virginia Tech University, claims that the term American people and beer are both racist. Professor David Brunsma, co-authored a book called Beer and Racism, How Beer Became White, Why It Matters, and the Movements to Change It. Now, wait a second. Seems to me that the whiter the beer, the more you're mocked for it. The more watered down, the less authentic, the less dark the beer, the more you are a poser. Isn't that true in American culture today? I mean, don't we have 8,000 microbreweries that brag about how authentic they are? Don't we have all these new kinds of beer flooding the market that tends to darker and darker flavors and colors? That's in, man. I'm telling you, the BIPOCs of beers. It's not Budweiser, it's not Miller Lite anymore, pasty white man's beer. We're talking about beer with a little body to it, right? And yet, here comes a sociology professor at the University of Virginia Tech saying, basically, beer is racist. The book provides, quote, a critical and interdisciplinary path to examine and understand the racial dynamics in the craft beer industry and the popular consumption of beer. The book claims that beer in the United States has, quote, always been bound up with race, racism, and the construction of white institutions and identities, unquote, and that the American attitude towards beer has led to intersectional inequalities. Beer. Beer. You know, if there's one thing that blacks and whites, Hispanics, lesbians, gays, straights, if there's one thing we all do with reckless abandon in this country, it's get drunk. The idea that getting drunk collectively, it's maybe one of the few things, you could call it America's national sport. You could basically say, in places like Wisconsin, where I live, right? It's all there is to do in the winter. It's the one and only thing you have to bring people together. But no, according to the professor at Virginia Tech University, it is steeped in identity politics and the destruction of intersectionality and intersectional voices. To promote this book, the professor tweeted, quote, "It's finally out! Beer and Racism, How Beer Became White, Why It Matters, and the Movements to Change It." Other professors called the book a crucial addition to emerging literature and, quote, "a data-rich evidence based on analysis of how beer, a seemingly innocuous cultural product, can carry deep racial meanings." Professor Eli Wilson, at the University of New Mexico, supports Bersma and said, quote, "Beer as a beverage does not perpetrate racism per se. However, the people who make decisions about beer, from who they market certain products to what images they put on beer cans, who gets hired in breweries, can indeed exacerbate racial inequity in our country." So what is he saying? First of all, he disagrees with Bersma, doesn't support him. Beer per se is not racism. So he does not just blanketly agree with our Virginia perfect lunatic. He does challenge him. But then he goes on to say the most Captain Obvious thing in the world. Well, but breweries tend to be white, and they tend to hire white people, and they tend to use white marketing agencies to market beer. I remember the 70s, right? Where you had retired football players and you had retired baseball players giving the commercials for Miller Lite, right? Remember Bob Uecker talking about beer from a white guy perspective? But then you had Billy D. Williams doing the Colt 45, right? Remember, you had Bob Uecker and his pasty white can of Miller Lite, and you had Billy D. with his quart of malt liquor. Smooth brother, Billy D. So I suppose that's what this is all about, right? That there's a certain beer that is cool for black people to drink, and there's a certain beer that we expect white people to drink. But I thought, again, the craft brewery movement kind of elided all those things. Just goes to show you the incredible things you can learn at Virginia Tech for $45,000 a year if you want to send your kid there. Well, this next story is a follow-up on a story we did. In fact, we've done 2 or 3 stories about this in the last 6 months. For whatever reason, the classical composers are really pissing off the social justice warriors. We did a story a couple weeks ago about how classical music is elitist and racist and white bread. We learned about 3 months ago, we had a story about Beethoven and how people who like Beethoven are simply reinforcing racial stereotypes. Now comes a third thing. And what gets me about this, guys, is this idea that who listens to classical music anymore? Is there really an audience of thousands of African Americans who want to clamber into a symphonic arena to hear Mozart? I'm sorry, I just don't see the demographic there. So you got a form of art considered high art, classical music, that not just many African Americans, many people across the board today, they don't want to hear it. America is a land of people who doesn't have the time or the money to acquaint themselves with finer things. They want crude things if they can get them right now. Sorry, America, that's you, right? But the idea that somehow honoring and venerating the musicians who gave us classical music, the handful of us who still like it, is a threat to something? Well, look at this latest story. Apparently, according to Slate magazine, Beethoven has a first name. The fact that we call Beethoven, Beethoven, like we call Cher, Cher, or we call Prince, Prince, that apparently is white supremacy. It's okay to call Cher, right, because she was half Indian, Cher. It's okay to call Prince, one of the great musicians of the 20th century, it's okay to call him by one name, because that's hip and cool. But now they're saying the fact that we call Beethoven, Beethoven, how dare Beethoven presume to, or the followers, the devotees of Beethoven, how do they dare presume to simply call him Beethoven? They ought to call him Ludwig van Beethoven. The implication is, I think, honestly, when you boil the story down, Beethoven's a cool name. Hey, Beethoven, bro. Hey, Beethoven, bro. Beethoven, man, that's a great name. If you throw the Ludwig in, right? If you start insisting that he's Ludwig von Beethoven every time you mention him, that's going to slow his roll, man. It's going to slow his cool. That's going to get in the way of all of these one-name rappers and all of these cultural icons. Lady Gaga won't like it. But it just shows you how much time is on their hands. If you go to the story, now referring to famous composers only by their last name is white supremacy. Christopher White, irony of irony, Christopher White, a white ginger, I might add, assistant professor of music theory at UMass Amherst, wants everybody to full-name musical masters so as not to avoid the habitual two-tiered method. Guys like Mozart just get called Mozart, while women and minority composers are referred to by their first and last name. I think you got a bigger problem, Ginger Boy. Quick, name me a female composer. Oh, there's a couple out there, but name them. Maybe the problem is not, go ahead and name for me a Hispanic composer. They're there, but you don't know them. And the bigger problem you have is not the names. The bigger problem you have is why. Why is it that the contributions of alternative gendered and raced classical composers don't have the same love and attention? You want to argue, Ginger Boy, that all music is the same. You want to argue that all music, what's happened in English departments is now happening in music departments. For 25 years as an English professor, I had to listen to all texts are the same text, right? If you've got a Victorian grocery list scribbled by a hand, a charwoman, a maid, and you have Shakespeare's Hamlet, they're just texts. In fact, you can't argue that Shakespeare's text is a greater text than the grocery list. In fact, because the grocery list was written by a female and a minority, the grocery list is actually more important than Hamlet. That's I've had to listen to for 25 years. Now it's infecting the music departments as well. Beethoven, Mozart, all the great Bach and Brahms, all these great composers who wrote scads of music that people still want to listen to, it's not the music, because the scribbling of some unheard of female composer who's never written anything, and what you've got here, textually they're the same thing. Music's music, right? So the rapper who's using his scratching on his record, right? The country music guy with his mandolin who's just crooning away. If books are books, texts are texts, well, then music is music. And right now we give this heralded status to classical music even though nobody listens to it. So therefore, we have to equalize it, right? We've got to elevate other kinds of music. He goes on to say, now this guy, by the way, Professor Christopher White, actually sang on America's Got Talent. He made it to the quarterfinals. So here we are. White said, quote, "These canonized demigods become so ensconced in elite musical society's collective consciousness that only one word was needed to evoke their awesome specter." Well, can't you turn around and say the same thing? Tupac, Prince, they became so ensconced in their popular music that they get one name. Well, how come Prince and Tupac get one name? And other rap and other minority forms of music don't. See, you can play this game right back at you, Chris, but you just want to go after the greats because they're great. All right, it's time for some real education, and if Katie were here, she'd feed me my setup, so I'm going to feed myself and feed it to you today, focusing on the marble bust of a man from the middle of the 1st century AD, which currently resides in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And there's the picture. Give us a little close-up, Mike. Really remarkable. The Romans were incredibly talented to take marble and to do this. This looks like your grandfather. This looks like the skill and the craftsmanship that's done on this face to carve out in marble this way is an astonishing achievement. Although the surface of this piece has been strongly cleaned and even recut in certain places, evidence of a heavy dark incrustation formed during centuries of burial is still visible. In fact, look at there, that crusted, you can sort of see it. It's as if the sculptor sculpted the image after one day's growth of hair. Right? This is the incrustation. This is a matter of how the statue had been buried for a long time, that the head looks like it's a little grimy, that looks like there's... But from our perspective, it could also be a man who shaved a day or two ago, shaved his head. And the head's... You can see it's almost as if the hair is starting to grow back. But look at the jowl muscles from... Stay on the profile here for a moment. Look at those jowl muscles, right? This clearly... we don't know who this is. It's a bust of a man. It could be somebody's grandfather. It could be a Roman senator. It could be a great Roman centurion or general. All we know about this is the firmness, the resolution of the face, that squarely set jaw, those tensed muscles in the cheeks, the piercing stare, that Roman aquiline nose. Private portrait sculpture like this was most closely associated with funerary contexts, so it's most likely a death mask or a death celebration. Funerary altar and tomb structures were adorned with portrait reliefs of the deceased, along with short inscriptions noting their family and patrons, or portrait busts accompanied cinerary urns that were deposited in the niches of large communal tombs known as columbaria. The funeral context for portrait sculpture was rooted in the long-standing tradition of display of wax portrait masks called imagines in funeral processions of the upper classes to commemorate their distinguished ancestry. Now go back to the front profile again. In the Roman Republic, which lasted from about 750 BC all the way to about 30 AD, almost 700 plus years of a Roman Republic. In the Republic, public sculpture included honorific portrait statues of political officials or military commanders erected by the orders of their peers in the Senate. These statues were typically erected to celebrate a noted military achievement, usually in connection with an official triumph, or to commemorate some worthy political achievement, such as the drafting of a treaty. A dedicatory inscription, called a cursus honorum, detailed the subject's honor's life and achievements, as well as his lineage and his notable ancestors. These inscriptions typically accompanied public portraits and were uniquely Roman features of commemoration. One last look at that picture from the front. Notice what the Romans didn't do. They didn't work on eyeballs. The eyes are white slates of marble, which makes the picture more imposing, more distant from us, less human in some ways, but still compelling. Okay, just as a reminder, since Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are demonetizing our content on a daily basis, we've decided to try to go around them by creating a Patriot Club. Patriot Club is a place where you send us 99 tax-deductible dollars once a year. We'll send you gifts like this handsome stainless steel tumbler as a thank you. Please visit patriotclub.us, that's patriotclub.us, to get yours. Now let's wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. Beethoven loved mac and cheese, and in his time it was very expensive. That gives him street cred and greater reason to be remembered by his one name alone. Kraft, baby. Kraft and Beethoven. That's all you need to know. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She would be Katie, but she's not here. So until next time, stay educated, my friends.